up on We Talk News this week, sold. The biggest cannabis trade show in the world, MJBiz Con, gets acquired by Emerald Holdings, one of the world leaders in trade shows. We talk with MJBiz CEO Chris Walsh. Plus, the DEA finally gives the green light to 2 cannabis companies for research, ending old misused 50-year monopoly. Montana opens for weed sales to adults and does over $1.2 million in sales in their first weekend. So, why is a cheetah smoking a joint in a PSA? The National Highway Safety Association message on driving under the influence of weed. Plus, why did Kansas pull Delta 8 from the shelves? All that and more. All of our state-by-state reports on cannabis from coast to coast on We Talk News.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media, and welcome to a brand new year of Weed Talk News. 2021 failed to provide any significant movement on federal reform for the cannabis plant, but that hasn't stopped the movers and shakers of the industry from keeping momentum going toward the normalization of weed. MJBiz, the producer of the world's largest cannabis business convention, has a new owner. Emerald Holdings, a leader in trade shows outside the cannabis space, has acquired MJBiz in an effort to expand and accelerate Emerald's engagement with cannabis customers and businesses. PCM's Jimmy Young spoke with Chris Walsh, the CEO of MJBiz, about what this partnership means for the future of his company.
Joining us now is a very happy guy named Chris Walsh, who happens to be the CEO of MJBiz Con that has been recently acquired by Emerald Holding Company for, let me check this number, was it $120 million, Chris?
Yeah, that was the purchase price.
And are you still counting that? Are you in the back room?
Well, the 2 co-founders, Ann and Cassandra, really started it, but it's a good deal all around for everyone involved.
And the premise here is they're a big trade show company outside of cannabis, and now they've entered cannabis. Can we take this as a sign of more acceptance of the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been writing about M&A activity for years, and it's accelerated. It seems like every week there's another big deal. A lot of it with the plant touching side of the industry, but we've had mainstream companies come in here and there. I've been seeing that build, and I think this is important for the industry because Emerald is a mainstream B2B events and media company, and they host big shows like Outdoor Retailer, international, pizza. They have things in different industries, right? And they felt comfortable and excited about getting into cannabis. They're seeing what's going on. So if we step back and look at this from a bigger picture, yes, it's a mainstream publicly traded company that now is comfortable getting in. And I think we're going to see more of this across the spectrum.
Look at what you personally have gone through over the last 24, 36 months. You had a great show in 2019. Everything was cranking, and then the pandemic hit. You had to have layoffs. You had to move your show to a virtual thing, and then you come back this year, and here we are a few months later after that, and you guys get acquired. That is an up and down roller coaster for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, anyone in this business knows it's up and down all the time. It's a roller coaster. Though that was some very deep valleys and now a really high peak. And in the thick of the COVID situation and our business model, as we've discussed before, taking a huge hit and trying to figure out how can we still provide value to the industry but also keep the company moving forward. And so there were some dark, tough days last year, especially. And to kind of fast forward now to the beginning of 2022. It's pretty amazing, and it feels good because it was very, very challenging in 2020, especially, and even last year.
Thanks, Jimmy and Chris. I'm not sure who was more happy about this deal. With more details on the Emerald Holdings acquisition of MJBiz Con, here's the Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt.
This is the business report from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News. This week, Emerald Holdings said it is buying MJBiz in a deal valued at $120 million. In 2021, MJBiz's revenues were about $27 million and their EBITDA was $13.7 million. Their event in October 2021 boasted over 18,000 paid registrations, but that was a big drop from the company's last pre-pandemic event where they had over 30,000 attendees. The Scotts Miracle-Gro Company announced 2 acquisitions this week, but the big news was that they warned that sales in the hydroponic division Hawthorne were expected to drop by 40% for the fiscal first quarter. They said the decline in sales was caused by a slowdown in the cannabis market as well as supply chain disruptions. MedMen is still refusing to close its agreed-upon deal with Ascend Wellness for the properties in the state of New York. Now, this investment was agreed upon in March 2021, and it was dependent upon New York State's approval, which gave that approval on December 16th. MedMen is saying that it didn't get New York's approval in time, but Ascend is saying that isn't the case. Ascend is also accusing MedMen of not remaining compliant with New York's cannabis regulations. Grab your popcorn, folks. This one looks like it's going to be one to watch. And that's it for this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt with the Green Market Report for We Talk News.
We're still waiting to see meaningful cannabis reform at the federal level in the United States, but there is change happening in the ways we research and look at weed. For more than 50 years, the University of Mississippi has been the only institution allowed to grow and research cannabis under the watchful eye of the feds. But that's all about to change. With that story and more from our nation's capital, here's Vote Pro Podcast's Phil Adams.
Hi, Phil Adams here from Vote Pro Podcast, here with the Weed Talk News DC report. A monopoly that has existed for more than 50 years has finally been broken. This week, 2 companies announced they've started growing and harvesting cannabis for research with the approval of the Drug Enforcement Administration. The Biopharmaceutical Research Company and Groff North America Hemplex have both received official DEA licensure to cultivate marijuana for study. Since 1968, only one facility at the University of Mississippi had been federally authorized to produce cannabis. In 2016, the DEA announced it would begin accepting applications for additional registered growers. Groff and BRC received approval of their applications last May. One of Capitol Hill's most widely recognized faces in the cannabis legal reform movement is moving on. Justin Streekel, federal lobbyist and political director for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, is stepping down to launch a new political action committee focused on advancing the legalization fight through elections. Streekel's years at NORML have been a watershed period that have seen unprecedented advancement in the cannabis legalization movement. Drawing inspiration from NORML's founder, Keith Stropp, Streekel says he continues to be guided by the principle that cannabis reform is, quote, only incidentally about marijuana, it's really about freedom. Streekel will be succeeded at NORML by Morgan Fox, former media relations director at the National Cannabis Industry Association. $10.4 billion. That's how much state tax revenues have been collected from legal cannabis sales since 2014. Starting with Colorado and Washington state, adult use legalization has expanded to 18 states today. With it, a windfall of state tax revenues for funding much needed public services and programs. As Karen O'Keefe, director of state policies at the Marijuana Policy Project, puts it, quote, this is in stark contrast to prohibition, which costs taxpayers billions of dollars each year to enforce. According to MPP, a significant portion of these revenues are going to support communities and local nonprofit programs that benefit people adversely impacted by the war on drugs. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
The state of New Mexico has issued its first adult use licenses for the sale of cannabis, while in Kansas, products containing Delta 8 have been taken off the shelves. Over the past 18 to 24 months, Delta 8 products, which are derived from hemp, but contain enough THC to get you high, have been sold illegally in the state. But now their Attorney General, Derek Schmidt, is making sure everyone in the state knows that selling Delta 8 is illegal. Now it's time for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 2022. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. Montana began selling adult use cannabis this past weekend. The limited release yielded more than $1.5 million from recreational purchasers. Montana has had a medical program for some time now. Together, the two programs netted nearly $2 million on Saturday and Sunday alone. Now, Montana has a 20% tax on recreational cannabis sales and a 4% tax on medical cannabis sales. Total together, the tax yielded more than $330,000 for the state's government to spend. Now, here's an unsurprising report, also out of Montana. Cannabis consumers are concerned that their supply of both medical and adult use cannabis will rapidly go away, disrupting the supply chain and forcing some consumers to return to the unregulated market for sales. Oh, it's messy here in Menominee. 4 companies were denied cannabis business licenses. 3 companies were given licenses. Each is either suing the city or defending the process of awarding the licenses. At issue is the supposed unfair application of policy and violations of the Open Meetings Act. Now, there seems to be some legitimate complaint here. It is necessary to construct a facility in order to gain the maximum points allowed in the city's scoring rubric. Yet Loom seemed to get the max points even though they're just renovating an existing facility. Another company is just adding on to an existing building and they receive the maximum points allowed. Now, those who lost are pointing to what they term as secret meetings where the cannabis business requirements were discussed. Now, we know you can't do that according to Michigan law. And in the city of Warren, a judge made them throw out all of the approvals granted under similar violations. Now, fortunately for consumers of cannabis, other cities have their programs already launched and access to both medical and recreational cannabis is easy for them. Now, this is a battle between the corporations and the city, and it's going to get legal. Now, there'll be more to report on this story for sure. And in the final story today, is there fentanyl-laced cannabis in Michigan? Hell no, according to Pamela Lynch of Harm Reduction Michigan. She appeared on this week's Jazz Cabbage Cafe show. Harm Reduction Michigan works directly with addicts suffering with heroin, cocaine, alcohol, opioid, and fentanyl addiction. When asked if she'd ever seen or heard of cannabis laced with fentanyl, she was quick to answer, never. Fentanyl doesn't incinerate, she explained. If fentanyl was mixed with cannabis, it would stay in the ash and fall harmlessly to the ground. So this is an urban legend, she claims, and she's not the only one. In November, Ms. Lynch traveled to Washington, D.C. for a conference on substance abuse, where a DEA agent, as part of his presentation, revealed that the DEA has no record of there ever being a case of fentanyl-laced cannabis in the entire United States of America. Now let's put this urban myth to bed and prevent the government from proffering such unproven and obviously incorrect propaganda ever again. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News.
COVID-19 and its derivative Omicron virus continues to wreak havoc all over the United States. Some events have been canceled altogether, but CannaCon in New York City is expected to go off as planned. No such luck in Vermont, though, where multiple scheduled events have been postponed. Here's Jessie Lynn Dolan with an update on what's going on in the Green Mountain State.
From Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. Due to all-time record high COVID numbers currently surging in Vermont, Vermont Cannabis Solutions law firm canceled their January luncheon and networking event scheduled for January 5th, updating folks on adult use licensing with an emphasis on preparing for provisional licensing. The second in a series of 3 informal, free, in-person events for those interested in possible adult use cannabis licensing collaborations hosted by Vermontawana is also canceled this week. The first maskless event in this series has added to the COVID numbers, including Vermontawana staff. However, their Ski Days event series will be starting on January 9th at Smuggler's Notch Resort. The Cannabis Control Board's full advisory committee met January 6th, both online and in person, at the Department of Financial Regulation in Montpelier. The full recording should be available soon for viewing. Cannabis community and grassroots advocacy organizations continue to relay concerns about the advocacy board members' potential, perceivable, and possibly real conflicts of interest. Vermont's hemp production plan has been granted approval from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which means that the 2022 growing season will be the first operating under the 2018 Farm Bill rules, which include total THC testing for most hemp plants. Farmers with hot crops will be able to keep from destroying them if they dispose of all the flowers and leaves or chip the entire plant into biomass for extraction or other commercial purposes. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
Over the pond in Europe, investors are starting to position themselves in Germany since that country is expected to legalize sales of cannabis early this new year. A Dutch lighting company called Signify is jumping to the head of the line with an acquisition of a Texas-based company called Fluence for $272 million. With more from Europe, here's Steve Arthur George in Portugal.
I'm Stephen Arthur George from Mackay Advisors in Lisbon, Portugal. This is the European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Giant North American cannabis brand Cookies, many of you know, looks to enter the UK. In partnership with Inacure out of Israel, the first Cookies branded stores should hit London streets in the first quarter of 2022. The stores will be focused on CBD sales only at this time in hopes of adult use and THC regulations in the future. There is also mention of similar stores launching in Austria as well. In nearby France, regulators now allow CBD extracts to be sold. At the final hour of 2021, French regulators published new regulations for the sales of CBD extracts from industrial hemp production. This provided some very needed clarity around the current CBD confusion in many European countries. That being said, the sale, possession, and consumption of CBD flowers remains illegal unless under medical prescription. Back here in Portugal, regulators are making changes to the regulations again. Just this week, Infarmed, the Portuguese health regulator, published updates to the medical cannabis regulations of 2019. Ironically, many of the updates were focused on industrial hemp production, causing confusion for many hemp farmers. Unlike France, the Portuguese regulators seem to want to keep CBD as a medicine for now. That's the European Cannabis Report. I'm Stephen Arthur George with Kai Advisors reporting for Weed Talk News.
So, exactly how much cannabis can one person actually use in one day for medicinal purposes? Well, according to Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves, the current proposal for their new state medical marijuana program limits the daily intake of cannabis to 3.5 grams of weed. The governor did some quick math and believes that amount puts about twice as much cannabis in the hands of patients than is necessary. So he has asked his legislature to cut the limit in half. It's as if the governor knows the exact amount patients need in order to get the proper medicinal benefit. Well, like so many politicians, their research and knowledge is limited to what they are told by their staff rather than actual medical professionals or researchers. And yes, this is the same state where, up until now, was the only state that could legally grow and research cannabis for the DEA. Wow. One state that already has over 600,000 medical patients is Florida. And that's where Heather Allman lives. And here's her report from the Sunshine State.
Happy New Year. I'm Heather Allman from Cannabis Law Report for We Talk News with this week's Florida Report. Florida's Green Rush has created business opportunities for more than just cannabis dispensaries. ACS Laboratories is a medical cannabis and hemp testing lab who has doubled their revenue every year since 2018, as Florida's patient numbers have climbed to over 655,000. ACS Labs stands out because it goes above and beyond the state's regulatory requirements, looking for over 100 different pesticides and other contaminants like several molds, which can be serious problems in human climates. ACS now tests cannabis for 13 of Florida's 22 medical dispensaries, which President Roger Brown estimates is roughly 60% of all cannabis legally sold in the Sunshine State. In other news, with 3 consecutive years of profitability, vertically integrated MSO Trulieve had 160 operating dispensaries nationwide at the end of 2021. Their laser focus on saturating the Florida market has allowed the company to keep its marketing costs down while effectively building up its brands. Trulieve accounts for about 55% of the dried cannabis flower and oil sales in the state, according to the Florida Office of Medical Marijuana Use. After their harvest acquisition in Q4 of last year, the MSO giant now has 17 dispensaries in Arizona and a clear pathway to leading market share in that state. Meanwhile, they've skirted another lawsuit over selling moldy pot, with U.S. District Judge Robert J. Hinkle granting a permanent dismissal on January 4th of the Sarah Bree Trulieve cannabis case, ruling that the investors suing had failed to allege that Trulieve intentionally misled them about the risk of crop contamination. In other news, while recent polling found that 59% of Floridians support full cannabis legalization, petition amendment rules changed drastically in the state last year, causing several cannabis initiatives and petitions like Regulate Florida and Floridians for Freedom to fall short of the new February 1st state deadline and additional 234,000 signature requirements. As for the now dead Make It Legal Florida or MILF petition, it was flatly denied by the state Supreme Court late last year for misleading wording on the petition. Maybe one day we'll have full legalization in this state. That's a wrap for Florida Cannabis this week. I'm Heather Allman for We Talk News.
The city of Philadelphia is making changes to its laws about employees who test positive for THC during candidate screening processes. A new ordinance went into effect on January 1st of this year that prohibits this screening process for pre-employment, but a positive test can still be grounds for termination if you test positive on the job during random testing and can still be used as just cause for termination. With the rest of the report from Pennsylvania, here's Claudia Post.
I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'm here to talk about what's hot and what's not in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania. I'm reporting for We Talk News. As of January 1, in a 15-1 vote by City Council, Philadelphia will prohibit employers from conducting cannabis drug tests for new hires, which is amazing, actually. And it's the first of its kind ordinance in the state of Pennsylvania. Go Philadelphia. There are a number of exemptions, of course, including law enforcement, employees who need a commercial driver's license, many healthcare workers, and anybody who significantly impacts the health and safety of other employees or members of the public. Medical marijuana's legality in Pennsylvania has changed the way police do traffic stops. A medical marijuana patient was pulled over. The state trooper smelled marijuana and began to search, and of course did search, the vehicle without a warrant. This was found to be illegal because in Pennsylvania, medical marijuana is legal. So therefore, this eliminates probable cause and they cannot do searches. So that's a great thing also. Air Wellness, a vertically integrated multi-state operator, is adding yet again another location that makes 8 in Pennsylvania, and they are significantly continuing to help us grow here in Pennsylvania. Thank you. Okay, that's a wrap for our Pennsylvania Cannabis Report. Again, I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. From We Talk News, have a great week. Thank you.
There's a new study out from Australia that evaluates drugged driving under the influence of cannabis. The study conducted at the University of Sydney concluded that marijuana breathalyzers don't work and are unreliable in measuring impairment under the influence of cannabis. And this wasn't just one study. Researchers looked at the data from 28 studies that showed similar inconsistencies. In Massachusetts, Governor Baker has been pushing hard on drug impaired driving measures and has asked the legislature to come up with a plan, but these ideas continue to die in committee and never reach the Senate floor. Though that didn't stop the National Highway Safety Agency from creating a PSA featuring the world's fastest animal, the cheetah.
The Tanzanian cheetah can run upwards of 80 miles per hour. Relying on keen eyesight, the cheetah hunts during the day. Here we see a cheetah driving down the desert road smoking a joint. What have I done? Now he's getting a DUI from the cheetah police, which means he'll have to go to cheetah court, pay up to 10,000 cheetah dollars, and probably end up in cheetah jail. Don't be like the Tanzanian cheetah.
Now, maybe they should rethink their choice of animal and replace the cheetah with a turtle, because for the most part, stone drivers are not speeding, but rather crawling. For the rest of the news from the Bay State, here's Ron Marshalsea.
I'm Ron Marshalsea with the Massachusetts Cannabis Report for We Talk News. Cannabis in Massachusetts has reached its lowest average price since the initial pandemic lockdown at $340 an ounce. When adult use sales first launched in Massachusetts in November 2018, the average cost per ounce was $390.81. The price reached its all-time high in February 2019 at $405 an ounce. The lowest the price per ounce has ever been in Massachusetts was $299.08 in April of 2020, and the price spiked the following month to $320.30. Suspicious activity in a Home Depot parking lot ended up leading Westfield Police Chief Lawrence Valliere to a house on Montgomery Road that had $2.5 million worth of marijuana plants. He reported finding exactly 1,000 marijuana plants in various stages of growth, and this is the third illegal indoor marijuana growing operation in Westfield in the past 2 months. Though Massachusetts voters in 2018 legalized the cultivation, possession, and use of small quantities of recreational marijuana, mass production, distribution, and retail operations are heavily regulated and require state and local licenses. And finally, owners of Boston Bud Factory Incorporated Frank Daly and Carlos Sarno are seeking records about Springfield's cannabis business selection process after their application was turned down twice. Boston Bud Factory Incorporated was among other companies not chosen for a cannabis retail license in Springfield this year, and they filed a public records request this week to explore the city's review process. The request, filed under the state public records law, comes after an internal audit of the city selection process found some scoring errors and said key documents were missing. Auditor Young No has stated despite the errors, the process was objective and fair. That's this week's Massachusetts Cannabis Report. For We Talk News, I'm Ron Marshalsea.
Bay State Cannabis Report is supported by Holyoke Cannabis, Holyoke's finest cannabis recreational experience.
Predictions for the future sale of cannabis have now reached $45 billion by the year 2025. Illinois is certainly doing their part too to contribute to this growth. Yes, another record has been set for this year. Here's the Cannabis Law Report's Thomas Howard with that story from the land of Lincoln.
Hi, I'm Tom from CannabisIndustryLawyer.com with Weed Talk News. The Illinois legislature rang in the new year by canceling the session for its first week, and it's probably also going to be canceled next week. And of course, that means that there will be delay with the pending cannabis legislation that is already on file in Springfield at the legislature, specifically HB 4097, that will expand the craft grow canopy size and other cannabis-related laws. They're going to have to wait. And also with litigation holding back the other 60 craft grow clients, they may not want that bill to pass. That would give the 40 craft growers already awarded a large head start, which they have already gotten, but they only have 5,000 square foot flowering canopy, not yet 14. And that is a very exclusive small club of only those 40 plus approximately another 20 license holders. And they are those select few people that really had a lot of news going on in the last week. The big story out of Illinois was that it sold $1.4 billion worth of cannabis in 2021. Almost double the first year operations in the state. And that only went to those existing cultivators, as no new cultivation facilities are yet open. Imagine how much more cannabis Illinois would have sold if they would have had over 100 craft grows and another 185 dispensaries, when those should be opening all over the state of Illinois in 2022 or whenever the litigation ends. And that's the news roundup from Illinois for the first week of January 2022. Back to you in the newsroom.
Colorado and Washington state were the first two states to legalize the sale of cannabis. But amazingly, in Washington state, they prohibited growing cannabis in your home. But that might be changing this year. Here's our Washington state report with the Talking Hedge host, Josh Kincaid.
I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Other states that have regulated cannabis markets already allow for home growing, but Washington state does not. However, Washington's 2022 legislative and regulatory priorities include a home grow bill. Washington's residents should be able to grow a few plants in a state that already allows adults to brew up to 200 gallons of beer and wine at home each year, but growing even one cannabis plant is a felony unless authorized for medical purposes. House Bill 1019 would have authorized adults age 21 and over to maintain up to 6 plants at home. However, according to the Cannabis Observer, HB 1019 wasn't considered a high enough priority to be considered in a year where there was less legislation as a result of the pandemic. The bill was tabled last session, but no law pertaining to cannabis should be a felony, period. So if it's not passed this year, it'll have to be reintroduced in the next biennium. Next week, you're going to find out more about Washington State's other 2022 legislative and regulatory priorities. But with that, we're going to have to roll up this Washington State Cannabis Report. I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge reporting for Weed Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
Every headline coming out of California these days spells doom and gloom for the legal cannabis industry. Meanwhile, the legacy market is booming. Is this state setting a good example for the rest of the country, or showing how state regulations can strangle it before it barely gets going? Christopher Smith from the American Cannabis Report has been covering this scene for years. Here's this week's California Report with Chris.
Hey, thanks for the intro and Happy New Year. Here's the first California roundup for 2022 from Weed Talk News. The FDA's approved a CBD trial at UCLA. UCLA is not only the most competitive university in America to get into, it's also on the leading edge of cannabis research. The Food and Drug Administration has approved a clinical trial for a CBD-based drug to treat opioid use disorder. Opiates killed 100,000 Americans last year, so not a moment too soon. A study published last year found that cannabis legalization has led to a marked decline in the volume of opioids prescribed across Canada. And a 2019 study found cannabis use led to a 64% decline in opioid use for chronic pain patients. Ananda Scientific announced that its CBD drug called Nanthea ATL5 will be studied at the Jane and Terry Semmel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. Excellent news. Let's get that show on the road. Why did some California cannabis farmers let this season's crop rot? By every estimate, more cannabis was grown in the United States in 2021 than ever before, says Forbes magazine, including an estimated 1 million pounds in California alone. But California's poorly planned regulations created cultivation capacity for 300% of California's demand. This oversupply has driven prices down so sharply, and taxes on the growers are so high at $154 a pound, that some growers in the world's largest single adult use market have refused to harvest this fall, leaving thousands of pounds of the world's best bud rotting in the fields. California, a market with so much promise, is a hot mess at the moment. So what's ahead? Top cannabis consultant Liz Rogan of Santa Barbara, California, says in an article that there are 3 trends to watch this year. One is increased mainstream use. Already, 38 states have legalized cannabis for medicinal uses, and 18 have fully legalized, and hemp, of course, is legal in all 50 states. Rogan says there are more to come in 2022. An explosion of low-dose offerings. Increased mainstream use will lead to demand for lower-dose products as a way to ease into using. More new products, especially edibles, will be big sellers. And number 3, increase of medicinal use as an alternative to pharma. More than 3,500 peer-reviewed scientific papers were produced in 2020 alone, which will help to educate doctors and patients alike. And I'm Christopher Smith from the American Cannabis Report, sending peace and love and California good New Year's wishes for the Weed Talk News.
Finally tonight, congratulations to the Cleveland School of Cannabis in Ohio. They unveiled a brand new campus this week in Independence, Ohio. The newly expanded campus boasts a total of 9,000 square feet of space. And this week, they held a big opening with a cooking exhibition prepared by their Director of Education, Nicole Phoenix, and fellow faculty member, Sue Whipple. The Cleveland School of Cannabis opened in January of 2017 and is the only state-approved school for cannabis education. They have graduated over 700 students and placed 60% of them in jobs. And that will do it for Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Elena Pinto, and remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
Millionaire Henry Ford once told a skeptical attorney when questioned about his level of education, "I don't know the answer, but I know the guy who does." A tip of the hat to the power of intellect. A nation's formation begins with the knowledge imparted on its future leaders, who'll take the reins and continue the construction of a world's creations. No matter the industry or corner of the universe to be birthed, a world is born through the strength and knowledge of its workforce. The next industry to take us to new heights of prominence has arrived. With hundreds of thousands of jobs expected by the year 2020, those who pursue measures of market education will be those leading the way. It is fact that throughout our long and prosperous history as a global people, education builds nations.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Difference is building a solution for that individual. Not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the cost low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.